Hello beautiful people, my name is Venti and today I'm going to be bringing you my 2020/2021 winter reading wrap up. For those of you who may be new to my channel, the reason that I say 2020/2021 is because for the season of winter, I consider it to be December, January, and February. Obviously, December of that time is going to be in the previous calendar year. I don't think this video needs any more intro than that, and I've got a lot of books to get through, so let's just get started. The first things I read in December 2020 were volumes 1 and 2 of Vampire Knight, a manga by Matsuri Hino. Vampire Knight follows Yuki Cross, a prefect and daughter of the headmaster of Cross Academy. In addition to attending Cross Academy herself, Yuki and her friend Zero act as prefects who keep the day and night classes of Cross Academy separate from one another. This is super important because the night class of Cross Academy, who everyone thinks are just super intelligent, super beautiful people, actually have a big and potentially society-ruining secret. They are all vampires. Most humans aren't meant to know about vampires on account of the whole sucking blood and like bad optics thing. Prior to being adopted by the headmaster, Yuki was actually found orphaned at age 5 during a vampire attack by one of the attendants of Cross Academy, a student named Kaname. And because of this, Yuki has grown a little bit infatuated with Kaname and has made it sort of her life's mission alongside her father to mend the gap between vampires and humans and sort of make a world that's safe for the two species to coexist. But her job is getting harder and harder, what with hunters sniffing around the academy looking for any excuse to kill the vampires and other vampires going rogue. And Yuki has to deal with all of that in addition to all of the beautiful melodramatic high school drama that we know and love from this sort of a series. Now, as far as things I like about Vampire Knight, listen, it's all about the melodrama. The art style is so dramatic and broody. I didn't know that like art style could impact the vibe of a story so much until I read a little bit more manga broadly, but Vampire Knight really definitely has a sort of heavier art style to it. The eyes are more stylized and the backgrounds are a little more like moody and dramatic. I don't know, it fits the vibe tremendously well. Yuki is your standard heroine for a story such as this. She's spunky and personable and loyal to an absolute fault. She gets herself into all sorts of stupid shenanigans because of how much she cares about other people, and I always find that a fun thing to read about. I also like that the story never lets up. Manga tend to fly by pretty quickly anyway, and it's very, very easy to feel like you're not satisfied with the amount of story you get in the pages. But with Vampire Knight, I never feel that way. I'm just turning pages constantly because something is always happening. And as far as things I didn't like, I think it's honestly disingenuous to say that I don't like anything about it. I mean, it's book candy. It's story candy. It does exactly what it sets out to do, and that is to entertain via melodrama and vampires. Following that, I read Pet by Akweke Amezi. Pet takes place in the city of Lucille, which is sort of a utopia of sorts. It is a city where monsters and monstrosity has been eradicated. Everyone's good, everyone takes care of one another, and things are theoretically perfect. At least this is what our protagonist Jam and her cohorts are led to believe. And it's easy to believe it at first. Jam has loving parents who have supported her transition, a best friend named Redemption who has a family that's also so full of love, a great education, a town that seems to protect them and offer them all the resources that they need to succeed. But one day when Jam goes into her mother's art studio and accidentally bleeds on one of her pieces, she ends up pulling a monstrous sort of being out of the painting that her mother drew. This creature calls into question everything that Jam has ever known when it tells her that it is here to hunt down a monster that's hurting somebody in the community, specifically a monster that is apparently hidden in Redemption's house. And Jam has to figure out how she's going to save her best friend while she is a kid in a world where all of the adults refuse to believe that monsters exist. I absolutely adored Pet. It was a beautiful, riveting story from start to finish. On a surface level, it was a very interesting mystery to follow Jam and Pet through, full of character interactions and dynamics that sort of show how denial and the keeping of secrets can actually do more harm than good, even if it's intended to do good. And we have at the core a child who wants to do so much good, but can't seem to, despite, in theory, having all the resources available at her fingertips to help. But deeper than that, I think Pet is an exploration of the sort of things that even we in a flawed and monster-full society do to hide monstrosity on a daily level just because it's so exhausting to admit that it's there. I don't want to spoil this book because I definitely think it's something you should read, but definitely consider the following trigger warnings before picking it up. One trigger warning in particular, and that is child abuse, with the abuse implied to be sexual. Again, I really lucked out with Pet. I don't think that there's anything about the story that I didn't like. Perhaps the resolution happened a little bit fast, but I feel like the resolution to the mystery wasn't the core of the story. The themes were the core of the story. It felt like the questions that created the promise of story at the beginning of Pet were answered by the end, whether or not the end happened in a more extended or in the condensed way that it did. Following that, I finished a webcomic that I've been reading for, I think, years at this point, and that is Yumis Cells by Donggun Lee. As the title implies, this webcomic follows a woman named Yuki who is 32 and working in an office as she goes through the various trials and tribulations of somebody having a sort of quarter-life crisis. Romance, there is changes in career, there is mostly a long narrative about self-discovery and self-acceptance, which I absolutely adored. And it's all framed through viewing Yumi not just as herself, but the various cells inside of her brain that control things like her hunger, her emotional responses, her logical responses. She wants to be a writer, so she has a writer cell that sort of creates her inspiration. The thing I like most about this webcomic is Yumi herself. I have been Team Yumi from the start. All of the relationships that happened were beautifully done and I think really organically done, but the story that I cared about most was Yumi's herself. I loved watching her grow from a pretty insecure person, somebody who didn't really trust herself and never placed herself first on her list of priorities, to somebody who knew she was the shit. As far as things I didn't like, I do wish that perhaps we had a couple more chapters just to really close out that ending. I feel like it was a little teeny bit rushed. Just for me, I would have liked a little bit more closure for certain things. And it may have been a choice to demonstrate that life goes on and we were only seeing, again, a slice of Yumi's life. But personally, I would have felt that the narrative itself had concluded a little more effectively had we gotten those extra bits, just to fully close out all of the things that were opened up earlier. Following that, I finished Two Dark Reigns, book 3 in Kendara Blake's 3 Dark Crowns series. There's so many numbers and none of them are in order, so I'm doing my best. Yes, Two Dark Reigns is book 3, book 1 is 3 Dark Crowns. Yes, this is the penultimate book in the 3 Dark Crowns series, which follows a series of triplet queens, Mirabella, Arsinoe, and Catherine. Each of these girls was taken at a very young age to live with a different faction on the island of Fenburn. Mirabella, the triplet queen with power over like fire and water and storm and stuff, was taken in by the elementals to hone her gift. Arsinoe, who theoretically should have been a naturalist, a strong person with sort of like druidic capabilities, the ability to sort of grow plants and commune with animals, was taken in by the naturalists. And Catherine, who should be a super strong poisoner, was taken in by the poisoners. And poisoners are people who can ingest poisons without dying and also have an incredible gift for concocting them. And the reason these 3 girls are separated from one another is because to ascend to proper queenhood, they have to, on the eve of their 16th birthday basically, begin a year-long process in which one kills the other 2. As you may have surmised, considering this series spans more than 1 book, the killing doesn't really go as planned. There's not much I can say about this book without spoiling it, so I will just leave it at I love this series so tremendously. The relationships between not just the girls themselves, but their various friends and the other women in their lives is so interesting and fascinating. The island of Fenburn specifically is matriarchal, and so women tend to play a little bit more active roles, which I super enjoy. However, in this book, we also get to see a little bit of the mainland, so we get to see the contrast of like a super patriarchal society, one that's much like our real life one, contrasted through the eyes of these queens who remember being the most powerful people in a place where women are more powerful anyway. It's very interesting to watch all these dynamics shift. And I feel like in this book specifically, we learn a little bit more about Queen's magic and the demands of the island. Of course, we don't get all the answers. There's still another book to go where these things are probably going to be wrapped up. But a lot of questions are raised in Two Dark Reigns regarding why the island makes this sort of blood demand on the queens and what, if anything, can be done to thwart it. As far as things I didn't like, and I don't think it's a spoiler because I guess even in my sort of spoiler-free bit at the very start, I did indicate that all 3 queens are still alive as of the beginning of this book. There is a relationship between Queen Catherine and a young man named Peter that really grinds my gears. Despite Catherine being kind of awful, I really enjoy her as a character and as a person, and I think she can do a lot better than Peter. Their relationship vexes me to no end. He seems to be torn between infantilizing her in a way that I don't think would be natural to a man who grew up socialized on Fenburn, and also fawning over her as queen and also being worried for her for spoilery in a way that felt very like emotionally whiplashy to me. And I'm just begging for that relationship to chill. I don't like Peter. without Peter, I think it might be a perfect book. Following that, I read With the Fire on High by Elizabeth Acevedo. With the Fire on High follows Emily Santiago, a high school senior who has one great passion and one great talent in her life, and that is cooking. And being in the kitchen and creating new recipes is the place where she finds the most joy. However, Emily and her family are not very well off, and though her high school offers a culinary arts class, which includes a trip to Spain, Emily worries about taking it. Not just because of the money, but because of the time, because she was a teen mother and she is working on raising her young daughter. A lot of choices seem to have been taken from Emily. All of this choosing what she is going to be in life seems to have come to a halt because what she is going to be has seemed to become a mother, a person who takes care of her child, a person who scrapes by to make ends meet. It's a lot of responsibility for a woman who is still technically a child herself, technically still a girl. But Emily is tenacious and determined, and more than anything, she has skill and talent. And once she starts cooking, there's nothing anyone or anything can do that'll stop her from following her dream. So it seems that a staple for Acevedo's books are characters that I absolutely fall in love with. You learn so much about these people that she creates in the short page count that we get, and they feel like such vivid, real folks. I rooted for Emily from the start. She is so smart. She's got such a good head on her shoulders, and she has so much love for her family, especially for her young daughter, who she is doing her absolute best to raise. Her strained but still let's keep it together for the kid relationship with her ex, Tyrone, was so fascinating to read about. Her relationship with her grandmother, where she wants to be still sort of babied and treated as a child because she is a child, but also understands that she cannot just push this responsibility on this older woman who's already sacrificed so much to raise Emily herself, while also being this young woman with, you know, bright eyes and big dreams and so much skill and talent that could make those dreams come forward. All of it came together in such a compelling character that I loved following her from the start. As far as things I didn't like, I think the romance subplot in this book is completely unnecessary. Could have been left as friendship, it could have been written out completely, and the story would not have changed. Mostly because it had very little, if anything, to do with Emily's actual growth as a character, which, as you know, I think was the backbone and the carrying of the whole story. At every YA contemporary writer out there, I promise you, you don't need to include romance in your stories. In fact, sometimes adding romance to your stories makes them weaker than they would have otherwise been. I mean, I say weaker, it was still an absolutely phenomenal story. I thoroughly enjoyed reading it, and I recommend it to absolutely everyone. Following that, I concluded an absolute beast of a book and an absolute beast of a trilogy by finishing Assassin's Quest by Robin Hobb. This is the third and final book of the Farseer trilogy. As you most certainly know if you've been with my channel for a little while, I've been buddy reading these books with my friend Katie from the channel A Sea of Tomes, linked in the description box below. So as I said before, this story concludes the Farseer trilogy, beginning with Assassin's Apprentice, which follows a young man named Fitzchivalry Farseer. I suppose giving him the last name Farseer is sort of inaccurate because he is technically bastard born. He is the bastard son of the former king-in-waiting Prince Chivalry, who, upon finding out that he has sired a bastard, abdicates his position in the royal line of succession and eventually winds up dead. And because being a bastard of royal lineage is not a safe position to be in unless one swears themselves into service of the king, Fitz is quickly conscripted by his grandfather to apprentice under the royal assassin. It's ugly, thankless, and messy work, but it will keep Fitz alive, and that is exceedingly important now that the 6 duchies are under a great deal of duress. And because of his position as somebody who is both not quite nobility, but also not quite one of the small folk, Fitz finds himself in the unique ability to go between these worlds and figure out things for the king as he is sent places. So in addition to learning how to use the magic of the skill that he inherited from his father, and figuring out how to be an assassin for the king who has conscripted him into service, Fitz also needs to figure out how to stop the various political turmoils that are happening in the 6 duchies as the king is slowly beginning to die. And if you think that's a pretty hefty list for a child who is like 10 at the start of the series to deal with all by himself, don't worry, it gets worse for Fitz. I don't know how to talk about this book without spoiling so much about the second, and also so much about the first. Robin Hobb jam-packs every book she writes with just absolutely so much stuff. And I feel like I've talked about this series to death in the past couple of videos that I've had, so I'll leave it with just saying what I liked and disliked about this book. As far as what I liked, Robin Hobb's ability to write engaging action, specifically the climax of this story. I often prefer the second book in a trilogy because authors a lot of the times know how to escalate, but they never know how to sort of hit the final notes of a story in a way that's perfectly satisfying. But I can very easily say that Assassin's Quest was a beautifully satisfying conclusion to this trilogy, in large part because of Robin Hobb's ability to create long action sequences that don't feel drawn out. There are huge battles that happen in this. There are huge super tension-filled moments of strife. And in addition to being action-packed and absolute page-turners, which they have to be considering how many pages there are in this book, the scenes do sort of double duty by wrapping up and closing up questions about world and about magic and about various characters and their interactions with one another. They just do so much stuff, and it's entirely interesting to read. None of it feels like info dumping, even in the slightest. After so much bad happening to Fitz, this conclusion was an absolute triumph. And though things were a little bit bittersweet, not just for him, but for a variety of other characters as well, they were ultimately satisfying. It was never going to be a perfectly happy story. This is not a perfectly happy book. But what it is honest and fair and heart-wrenching. And in case you couldn't tell, I don't have anything I disliked about this book. Far and away, the majority of the plot threads and character interactions that were opened up at the start of Assassin's Apprentice were more than closed up by Assassin's Quest. You get answers to the things that you want to get answers to, and the things that you don't get answers to, it's fine. You do not miss them for the conclusion of this story, which is remarkably hard to do because I'm a super inquisitive person and I want to know everything. So the fact that Robin Hobb pulled it off so that I don't feel cheated for not immediately getting the answers to every single thing that I thought up in my head is phenomenal. Read this series. If you love high fantasy, please, please, please give it a try. Following that, I read the sequel to A Blade So Black by L.L. McKinney, and that is A Dream So Dark. Whenever I talk about the series, I always mention the tagline, which is, what if Buffy the Vampire Slayer was the one that fell down the Wonderland rabbit hole? Because it is just so apt for explaining what's up. The first book of the Nightmareverse series introduces us to Alice, who upon losing her father unwittingly summons into this world the embodiment of a nightmare, a creature from Wonderland that feeds off the negative emotions and sorrow that humans create. And when this nightmare attacks her and she is saved by a handsome but interesting looking gentleman who calls himself Addison Hatta, Addison is intrigued by Alice's ability to see not only him but the nightmare itself, and decides to conscript Alice into basically the war of keeping the nightmarish creatures from Wonderland outside of the human world and protecting humans from nightmares, etc. Cue training montages, cue Alice being the baddest bitch in the whole wide world, while still managing to keep this a secret from her mom, who is deeply worried about Alice becoming the victim of police brutality, and also maintaining a normal high school life as much as she possibly can. One day, Alice is called back into Wonderland to sort of fix up a nightmare cleansing gone wrong, and she realizes that the nightmare she was supposed to have cleansed has left behind a weird black ooze. After trying and failing to clean this up again, Alice is accosted and almost defeated by somebody who calls himself the Black Knight, who forces Alice to send a message to Addison back on Earth. When this message, which is a very literal thing, as things from Wonderland tend to be, passes on into Addison, it poisons him and sets Alice off on an adventure to find out how to save her mentor and friend and sort of crush. And the story follows from there, with Alice and her group of friends having to basically connect some artifacts from Wonderland to figure out not only how to heal Addison, but to save Wonderland, which seems to have dark forces rising behind the curtain in it. A Dream So Dark picks up where A Blade So Black ends, and basically does everything that a sequel should. What I love about A Dream So Dark is that it's an excellent sequel. It takes all of the premise that we were given in book one and escalates it. It raises the stakes emotionally for the characters. It increases the conflict and makes more clear what is at stake should our characters fail. It makes certain character interactions and certain character relationships far more believable. Alice is far more fleshed out, as are all of the supporting cast. But what I really loved seeing was her and how she has grown and how much this trauma has affected her, but how little she's gonna let it affect her moving forward. She's growing into her power and growing in her confidence, and I'm so proud of who she is becoming. And the final book that I read in December of 2020 was Erin Bowman's The Girl and the Witch's Garden. This book follows a 12-year-old girl named Piper Peavy who, when her father becomes deeply, deeply sick, is forced to spend her summer vacation on her grandmother's estate. Her grandmother, Melina M. Mallory, is super wealthy and super aloof, and there are rumors going around that she happens to be a witch. Piper doesn't want to leave her father behind during this time, especially because her mother had abandoned her to go live at her grandmother's estate when Piper was very young, and she just doesn't want to be around her and her grandmother. But being 12, she has very little choice in the matter, and when she gets to the estate, she finds that it's not as abandoned as she thought that it might be. In fact, it is full of children who claim to have a variety of magical gifts that Mrs. Mallory is using to get to a secret inside of the witch's garden. And one of these children claims that Piper has one of these gifts as well, and that it might be sort of the clue and the linchpin for getting the children into the witch's garden to retrieve the spoilery magical object that all of them need for spoilery reasons. It's very hard to give a spoiler-free synopsis, I think, of a middle grade book just because so much of the story lynches around the plot. What can I say about The Girl in the Witch's Garden that isn't just gonna sound like a gushing mess? I absolutely adored the story. It was very, very sweet, but at the same time, very heartbreaking. In addition to a romp where, you know, young children are basically solving these clues and working out this mystery and figuring out which adults they can trust and which ones they can't, while developing bonds with one another. On the other side of the story, you have Piper's father's illness and her sort of coming to terms with this basically second loss of a parent because she and her father are all they have left. Piper's relationship with him is one of sort of, at least in her eyes, mutual care, and she can't take care of him through this sickness. But upon learning that she has this gift and she might be able to get this big spoilery thing, she realizes that there is a chance, perhaps, where she could take care of him and things go back to the way that they're supposed to be. The only thing that I didn't like about this book is that it seems like it's a standalone, and I want more. And there's enough open at the end that I think Erin Bowman could write a sequel if her publishers picked it up. So maybe I'm a little biased, but I think you should buy yourself like 20, 30 copies so that the publisher sees that there's interest in this book and Erin gets to continue writing it because, oh my God, it's so good. And that closes out December. So if you've made it through this video by now, you know that it's already very long, even though I'm only done with one out of the 3 months I was going to cover. Because the number of books that I read in January and February is similarly long, I've decided to split this video into 2 separate wrap-ups so that you're not stuck watching basically a feature-length film every time you sit down to watch me talk about some books. So I'm gonna call it here. Thank you so much for watching part 1 of my winter reading wrap-up for 2020 and 2021. If you like this video, please leave it a thumbs up, and if you like me, maybe consider subscribing to my channel. I put out videos every weekend, and I would love for you to join my little booktube family. If you'd like to see more bookish content from me, all of my socials are linked in the description box below. You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Goodreads. Once again, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you with another video very, very soon. Goodbye.